Sadaqallahu Ajib. Alhamdulillah. Now we may proceed to our first session and our second day of this international conference. We have slight changes because one of our speakers have to leave quite early today. So we would like to call our Professor Dr. Mama Abdul Rahman from Persatuan Umat Islam Indonesia Persis to be together with us in this second session. We may now call to the stage our panelists, Professor Dr. Mama Abdul Rahman from Persis Indonesia, Tuan Haji Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir, the Director of Citizens International Shah, Sheikh Yusuf Abbas, the General Coordinator of the Global Campaign to Return to Palestine, our brother Datuk Paduka Professor Muhammad Abu Bakar from Department of International Strategic Studies, University of Malaya, our Professor Dr. Hafizi Muhammad Noor, the General Coordinator of Al-Aqsa Sharif Organization Malaysia, and our moderator, our brother Dr. Abdul Latif bin Muhammad Ibrahim, UTM Perdana School, STI Polisi, University Technology Malaysia. Tafadhal. The title for the second session is The Palestine Struggle, Strengthening International Advocacy and Support. Brother moderator, may I have your attention please? Dr. Abdul Latif. Thank you. Dr. Abdul Latif, may I have your attention please? Since our guest speaker for the keynote address will arrive anytime soon, between 9:30 to 10 a.m. So we might have to interrupt you in between the discussion. Thank you so much. We may proceed now.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Praise be to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala that we are able to meet here this morning on this very auspicious occasion of discussing and continuing with the agenda which we started yesterday regarding the liberation of Al-Quds and freedom for the oppressed of the world. I do not want to go into a lengthy introduction about what we are going to do today, since the speakers are already here, and as mentioned by Tuan Haji Azmi, that we have a very packed program today. I would just like to introduce the speakers for this session. We have on my immediate left is Tuan Haji Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir, and we have Professor Dr. Maman Abdul Rahman beside him, and we have Dr. Hafizi, Professor Hafizi Muhammad Noor, followed by Sheikh Yusuf Abbas, and finally on the far end is Professor Datuk Muhammad Abu Bakar. The first speaker for this session will be Professor Dr. Maman Abdul Rahman. He is from Persatuan Islam Bandung and also from the Bandung Islamic University. Without much ado, I would like to call upon him to deliver his speech.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarika lahu wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu la nabiyya ba'dahu. Qala Allah Ta'ala fil Qur'anil Karim, a'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim, innamal mu'minuna ikhwatun faslihu baina akhawaykum wattaqullaha la'allakum turhamun. Wa qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al muslimu man salima al muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi. كثيرا ما نتكلم وهنالك مؤتمرات كثيرة جدا والآن أيضا وهذا المؤتمر نرجو هنالك نجاح وهنالك أيضا إن شاء الله في الأشياء كثيرة لتأييد على تحرير فلسطين في المستقبل. وتكلمنا وقد بالفلسطينيين كما عرفنا، ولكن أيضا المسلمون جمعا وكذلك لمن يهتم بالأحرار ومن يهتم بالإنسانية في العالم، ولكن هناك أحيانا غير عادل وذلك إذا كان لمهمتهم هؤلاء يدافعون جدا ولكن لاهتمام المسلمين هؤلاء لا يهتمون كثيرا، خاصة مثلا في الأمم المتحدة كما قلنا وكما عرفنا وكما رأينا اليوم. إن قضية فلسطين تعتبر قاسما مشتركا بين كل التيارات العربية والإسلامية، وهي أمن إسلامي وحاجز وطني وارد قومي، إضافة إلى أن المشروع الصهيوني لا يرمي الاحتلال فلسطين وحدها، بل ربما في المستقبل يهدف إلى إسرائيل الكبرى التي تبتدئ من القرار الاثنين ويهدد الأمة باستيعاب الخطر يطال الجميع. وهذه مشكلة كبيرة جدا خاصة في المستقبل. العلاقة بين الشعب الفلسطيني والشعوب إندونيسيا هنالك علاقة قوية جدا، علاقة حريقة. ففلسطين من أوائل الدول التي تعرفت باستقلال إندونيسيا زمان. في بندung سنة 1955 تحت قيادة رئيس الراحل سوكارنو علما بأن الدول المشتركة في ذلك المؤتمر قد أخذوا استقلالها وفلسطين. فعلى الدول المشتركة في مؤتمر 1955 وأن إندونيسيا أخذت لنصرة شعب فلسطين في الحصول على استقلالهم لا سيما على إندونيسيا أكبر دولة إسلامية. وهناك في إندونيسيا جمعيات كثيرة جدا تهتم بتحرير فلسطين، ولكن هنالك بالرغم من الأكثر من الجمعيات وهناك أيضا نحن استمعنا كثيرا في إندونيسيا وكيف الحل من ناحية ربما مالية ومن ناحية تنظيمية ومن ناحية الأخرى التي تهتم نحن هنا في إندونيسيا. ونحن كمسلم في إندونيسيا سنهتم كثيرا بهذا البلاد الكريم. إن الواقع فلسطين والإسلام للعرب والوحي الإسلامي واستكبار أن الأمريكي والتوجه العالمي كل ذلك فتح الباب على مصاري للمشروع اللي يتمكن ويمضي في طريق السيطرة على المنطقة كلها اقتصاديا وثقافيا وأمنيا وسياسيا. فإندونيسيا إن شاء الله تستطيع أن تكون رائبا وقائدا في تنهيض الأمة والخروج من الاستسلام والوقوف أمام استكبار الدول المتكبرة الغير إسلامية ومن عاونهم. لابد للجامعة الإسلامية في إندونيسيا في العالم الإسلامي جميعا أن تعرف الشعوب بعدو الصهيوني مستندين إلى القرآن الكريم وما فيه من وصف منفصل لليهود وإلى السنة مطهرة ثم كتب اليهود مقدسة كالتوراة وغيرها تبتاري وكتاب المعاصرين عنه. إندونيسيا أحد البلاد التي ليست لها علاقة دبلوماسية مع إسرائيل حتى الآن. نحن جمعية إندونيسيا والمسلمون في إندونيسيا يرفضون علاقة مع إسرائيل حتى اليوم، بل نرفض للزيارة هناك إلا بعض الأشياء. مثلا هناك سياسيون أحيانا يزور ولسنا ندري ماذا يتكلم معهم ونحن أيضا ننقدهم. وثانيا ربما للزيارة على القدس وهؤلاء إندونيسيا بعد الأمرة وبعد يسافرون إلى فلسطين. لابد من الشعوب العربية والإسلامية أن ترفض كافة أشكال التطبيع مع صهاينة كما ترفض الاعتراف العلني والضمني بديانهم. وبالتالي فإن علماء الأمة مطالبون بالحفاظ على هذه الدعوة ويقاوم كل سعي نحو تطبيع مع العدو، وذلك بدعوى الشعوب لمقاطعة منتجاته لحرمتها ولنا الإرباح وتقوي اليهود على الإخوة الفلسطينيين والدعوة إلى وقف تعامل مع هذا الكيان دبلوماسيا وتجاريا وثقافيا ونقليا. والسؤال هو هل يمكننا أن نقطع كل المنتجات البلاد التي تميل إلى إسرائيل؟ وأنا أرجع أيضا المقاطعة من الشجار مثلا الذين هؤلاء ينتجون تلك الشجائر، لأن الشجائر هذا يخسر المسلمين وكذلك طبعا يعاون على اليهود خاصة الشجائر الأمريكية. وكذلك فإن فلسطين من الدول المشتركة أقصد الاستبداد على علماء الأمة تقدير المسلمين بأن النصر حليف المسلمين وأن القدس ستعود بإذن الله إليهم، خاصة أنه مرت الأقصى ظروف أقصى مما يعاني الآن حيث منعت فيه صلاة الجماعة ولم يرفع منذ زمان، وهذه مشكلة كبيرة خاصة للمسلمين هناك. وليس من المستحب أن يهيئ البرستيدان قادة من بعض الدول العربية وكذلك والإسلامية. ولذلك نحن أرجع إلى الأحزاب السياسية والجمعيات الاجتماعية والحركات المجتمع أن تتكافئ أيديهم وقواهم الدفاع عن فلسطين. وكذلك هنالك لابد من التوصية في المستقبل عن نتائج هذا المؤتمر الكبير. التوصية بكيان مثلا المقاطعة، وثالثا هنالك ربما كنوت نازلة خاصة للدفاع عن الفلسطينيين المضروبين اليوم، كنوت نازلة مهم جدا. هل ممكن مثلا من هذا المؤتمر هنالك توصية؟ وعلى الإخوة الذين يختلفوا في العقائد والفقه مثلا نرجو bima qad quddimat bil ams an at-taqrib fa nahnu ka ماذا نقول السنة والجماعة نتكافأ معهم وكذلك للدفاع عن فلسطين وتحرير فلسطين ولا يوجد هناك ولا يوجد هناك أهل ما يسمى بالشتائم خاصة إلى الصحابة رضي الله عنهم الذي قد قاد إلى ماذا تطوير المسلمين في العالم منذ بداية الإسلام حتى الآن نحن أيضا نستمر لجهادهم ودعوتهم وتربيتهم وتنشر الإسلام والمسلمين في العالم. هذا ما أقول لكم. الله يقود بأيدينا إلى ما فيه خير للإسلام والمسلمين. وقبل أن أختتام من كلامي هذا نريد أن نقرأ الآية القرآنية من سورة الأنفال أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة ومن رباط الخيل ترهبون به عدو الله وعدوكم وآخرين من دونهم لا تعلمونهم الله يعلمون وما تنفقوا من شيء في سبيل الله يوفى إليكم وأنتم لا تظلمون. صدق الله العظيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
We thank the first speaker for his very spirited speech, which took very short time but was full of meaning, particularly about the Indonesian experience and Indonesian involvement in the issue of Palestine. For the benefit of the audience, I would like to say that each panelist has been allocated only 15 minutes to speak. So before we go to the next speaker, I would like to introduce him, Haji Muhyiddin. He's the Director of Citizens International. Citizens International is an organization that is campaigning international issues, human rights, and other relevant to the oppressed of the world. It was established 10 years ago, and at the moment it is based in Penang. This organization is under the umbrella of the Universal Justice Network, and he will now take the floor to deliver his address. Muhyiddin.
My dear sisters and brothers, my dear international guests from Iran, from Lebanon, from Indonesia and other countries. First of all, let me thank and congratulate the organizers, particularly MAPIM and the Ulama Association, who worked very hard to organize this very, very important conference, which is coming at a very important period in the history of the anti-colonial struggle against Israel. Now, if you have looked at the news on the internet, you would have seen that the 66th anniversary of Al-Aqsa, or the catastrophe, which happened 66 years ago, was commemorated in many parts of the world, including Palestine itself. And the Israelis received this commemoration by killing 2 young people in the West Bank, one 15 years old and the other 17 years old, Muhammad and Nader. And also, they demolished a workshop, they demolished a commercial shop, they demolished a house. Now this is the way the Israelis are commemorating the Nakba. This is the continuation of the Nakba. This is the continuation of the catastrophe that took place 66 years ago. But unfortunately, this news is hardly reported in this part of the world. It doesn't get headlines. It's not even reported in some of the major newspapers in Malaysia. And even if it's reported, there is hardly any response from the Muslims, who constitute 1.6 billion, over 20% of the world's population, which is enormous resources. Saudi Arabia alone having a gross domestic product of more than 800 billion. Whereas the Palestinian Authority only needs about less than maybe 5 billion to run the affairs in the West Bank and other parts. So there was no response to this sort of thing. And this is going on every day, going on every month, going on every year. And we are tolerating it. We are parties to it by not doing effective action to liberate Palestine from the colonization by the Zionists. So we have a certain responsibility. It's not just the people of Palestine. In fact, I salute the courage and the steadfastness of the Palestinian people. I don't think any other community would have withstood such hardship, such trials. They would have easily given up and surrendered to the Zionists. But they continue fighting generation after generation. And this we must honor, we must appreciate. But at the same time, we who are not there, who are not feeling the heat of the colonial oppression, we must do something effective. Conferences are good. I think there are 1,000 conferences going on at the moment throughout the world. But conferences must come out with outcomes that promote the liberation of Palestine. If we can contribute towards taking one step forward in this glorious struggle of liberation, I think it will be a success of this conference. So bear that in mind, the organizers. You have a great responsibility on your shoulders to ensure that this doesn't become a talk show, it becomes a conference of action. And I think it will, under the leadership of Brother Ustaz and Brother Azmi. Well, let me now come to the subject. I'm supposed to speak about the foreign support that goes to Israel. Now we all know that, see, one of the things that we don't realize is the urgency of the problem in Palestine. You know, year after year, day after day, moment after moment, the Zionists are planning how to occupy, how to perpetuate the occupation of Palestine. They are taking action one after another, and yet we are just watching. Now there is a project now to cleanse to change the demographic balance in Beit al-Muqaddis. Golda Meir in 1973 laid down a policy that of 22% of Palestinians and replaced by areas as green areas. They allow settlements to come up. But they don't allow a Palestinian whose house has been demolished to go and build a house on that land. So as a result, the demographic balance in Jerusalem is changing. And their intention is to slowly change it to such a level that the Palestinians Palestinian population in Jerusalem, where is the two-state solution? Under the two-state solution, which in my it has collapsed not because of anybody, but because of the Israeli itself. It's greed. It has gone on building settlement. Almost 40% of West Bank has been taken over with the Israeli settlements. Now, where is the two-state solution going to be? There is no way there's going to be a two-state solution. It has to be a one state where Muslims, Christians, Jews have lived for thousands of years in harmony until the coming of Zionism in Europe in the late 19th century. It is Zionism that created this division, created this hatred. Zionism is a racist project, a project that wants to take land and convert it into a Jewish state. And yet, the international community, the OIC, the Muslim countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, what are they doing? What are they doing with their resources? What are they doing with their oil wealth? What are they doing with all the armies? What are they doing with the $50 billion worth of arms they purchased from America, from Britain, and keep the arms industry going in America and Britain? What are they doing with this? Well, they're supporting the Zionists by supporting America, which is the strongest supporter of the Zionists. Now, this is the question we have to ask. It's time we begin to notice the elephant in the room. All this while, we have just talked in very general terms. Now we must know what is the reason for this lack of energy, lack of initiative on the part of the Muslim Ummah, which constitutes 1.6 billion, which has enormous resources, unable not only to liberate Palestine, but to witness the cruelties, the injustice, the indignities that is being daily inflicted on the population of Palestine. Why? Why? So, I think, for me, the reason is quite simple. One is the US support and the US link between certain Islamic states, Muslim states, not Islamic states, Muslim states, who are collaborating with the Zionists, with the Americans, to just keep things like that until, while the Israelis are continuing to colonize, continuing with the colonization, continuing with the ethnic cleansing. These are the people who are collaborating. Now, we have seen recently in Egypt, there was an opportunity. There was an opportunity to strengthen the border, the resistance to Israeli colonialism, because Egypt has a border, Jordan has a border, Lebanon has a border. In Lebanon, we have seen how the Hezbollah, with the help of Iran, has been able to contain the expansion of the Zionist state. They drove away the Zionists in the 80s, and in 2006, they in reality defeated the fourth strongest army in the world. Now, what about the border with Egypt? What about the border with Jordan? What are we doing? In Egypt, there was a chance. There was this overthrow of the Mubarak regime, and we were joyous. We thought, here comes the opportunity for us to do something effective, something that will lead to the liberation of Palestine. But it didn't last long. President Morsi was overthrown by a military coup, which the Americans, the Europeans, the Saudi Arabian government, the Gulf governments refused to recognize as a military coup. In fact, are supporting this military coup because the Egyptian army, after the Camp David Accords, is no more an army that is patriotic to the Egyptian people. It has signed away its independence. It has signed away the sovereignty of Egypt. The Egyptian army, although the ordinary soldiers are good, but the military elite is now working closely in hand with the Zionists, with the Israeli army, Israeli intelligence, to protect Israel. They've never fired a bullet into Israel. They have killed thousands of people in Egypt. This very army, which is supposed to protect the sovereignty and independence of Egypt, which is supposed to help the Palestinian struggle, is killing its own people. 20,000 are in jail on framed-up charges. 1,000 have been sentenced to death after a 15-minute trial. What sort of system is that? What are we doing? Why are we just sitting and witnessing these things? I think it's time we stop sleepwalking. Wake up from our slumber. Really act to free Palestine. And this has to come. There has to be a change in the Arab countries. There must be the voice of the people. The $800 billion will be used to liberate Palestine, not to go and deposit it in United States banks, not to buy arms for 50, 60 billion, which you're not using it. Not for President Walid al-Salam to go and buy a jet worth 300 million and spend another 200 million trying to make it like a palace, a flying palace. I mean, this is how money, what Allah has given us is being used. So what I'm suggesting is, I think my time is almost up. So a few practical things. One is, I think there is no awareness about the urgency of the problem of liberating Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa. You go into any newspaper in this country, hardly anything is mentioned. There's more about actresses and footballers than anything about Palestine in our newspapers. Hardly anything. Thank you. I'm given another 5 minutes, so I just want to end up that. Now, when we talk about awareness, it must be continuous. It's not just a one-year celebration or one-year congress or conference. It has to be continuous. It has to be sustained. First of all, I think a history of the Palestinian struggle must be taught to our children in the schools. It must become part of our syllabus in the schools. You ask 9 out of, maybe 10 out of 10 children in our schools, how was Israel created? I don't think 9 will be able to answer that question. Because history is not taught properly in the schools. So this is one thing that concretely we should press for. In this country, 60% are Muslims. There are also a lot of non-Muslims who sympathize and who support the Palestinian struggle, because it's not a religious struggle, it is a liberation struggle, a struggle against colonialism, a struggle against imperialism. So there are a lot of non-Muslims in this country who would support, but they do not understand the issues. So it is our responsibility to make them aware of the issues. So we have to think of programs. This conference must come out with a committee or secretariat which sits every day and thinks how to push this struggle forward. Otherwise, I think we would have failed in what we are trying to do. We should really support those who are resisting Zionist organization, as well as the dictatorship in Egypt and other parts of the Muslim world. In other words, we need to fight for democracy rooted in the Islamic culture, tradition, and values to come to Muslim countries. This will strengthen. This will give us the spirit of jihad. Now they are trying to kill the spirit of jihad. The word jihad is itself an ugly word for many Muslims now, many Muslim elite, Muslim leaders, Muslim governments. Now we must glorify the word of jihad. The spirit of jihad must be implanted in the hearts of every child in the Muslim world. So we have to fight for the democracy based on Islamic values in Muslim countries. And thirdly, there is a campaign going on, boycott, divestment and sanctions. This was initiated by civil society organizations in Palestine, and it has had many success. If I just read 2 weeks ago that the biggest teachers union in the European Union has boycotted, has cut off relations with Israel. And companies in Norway or somewhere have withdrawn investment into companies there. And yet in Malaysia, we still get goods coming through Singapore into Malaysia from Israel. Israeli ships are visiting our ports. How is that? What are we doing? Sharon, about the persimmon, the fruit comes from Malaysia, named Sharon. That devil who's responsible for Sabra Shatila, his name, that fruit bears his name. So I think this BDS campaign in Europe, especially in Europe, it is gathering a lot of momentum, and it is worrying the Zionists. In fact, recently, Kerry, the US Foreign Secretary, he privately told somebody that if this BDS campaign gathers momentum, Israel will become like South Africa before, an apartheid state, and it will not get the support, international support it is getting now. So it is also our duty now in this part of the world and in other parts of the world to join together and do something, promote this BDS campaign. And finally, I think there is a lack of communication between us. I'm doing something here, you're doing something there, one NGO is doing something here. But there is no little communication. There's so much going on in Indonesia. From what Ustad was saying this now, how much do we know about it in Malaysia? How do we coordinate our efforts? Why don't we have joint protests, joint commemorations? There are 200 million Muslims in Indonesia. And in this region, there are 300 million Muslims, probably the biggest number. So why don't we coordinate? Even among ourselves in the region, we are not coordinating. What more internationally with Lebanon, with Syria? I think this is something that the Secretariat that is going to come out of this must give serious thought. Communication, exchange of information, common campaigning, common activities. With that, I think, inshallah, if we all wake up now and do something, inshallah, we can liberate Palestine, we can liberate Al-Quds, we can liberate Al-Aqsa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Tuan Haji, for your good speech. And of course, there were many facts that you exposed, which is actually these are the things that we always raise at every meeting. The important thing is, of course, what do we do after this? So we hope at the end of this conference, we will be able to come up with concrete action plan to realize the objective of helping in the cause of Palestine. Now, I would like to call upon the third speaker, since our guest of honor is still not yet here. He is a Sheikh Yusuf Abbas, and he's going to talk on demanding the right of return and recognizing the Palestinian state. Now, Sheikh Yusuf Abbas is from Syria. He's the general coordinator of the global campaign to return to Palestine. Without much ado, I would like to call upon him to take the floor. Sheikh, tafadhal.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. طبعا بداية أود أن أشير إلى أن عنوان الكلمة الذي رأيته في البرنامج على أساس أنه كلمتي هو مغاير للعنوان الذي قدمته للإخوة في المؤتمر. يبدو أن هناك خطأ فني ما حصل، وبالتالي وضعوا عنوان حول حق العودة والاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية. طبعا مؤمنون بحق العودة ونعمل له، ومؤمنون بالدولة الإسلامية الكبرى التي تكون فلسطين عاصمة لها إن شاء الله، وبالتالي نسأل الله عز وجل أن يحرر كل فلسطين على أيدي المؤمنين. بداية في إطار عنوان مؤتمر تحرير المسجد الأقصى، أود أن أتحدث بشيء من الواقعية. نحن اليوم أمام عنوان كبير جدا، تحرير المسجد الأقصى. هذا العنوان الكبير تعيش الأمل تجاهه منذ أكثر من 60 عام. مع الأسف نحن اليوم في لحظة تاريخية يمكن أن نقول أن المسجد الأقصى يرزح تحت أسوأ الشروط والظروف على مدى تاريخه. أنا كنت في الأيام الماضية أراجع الانتهاكات الإسرائيلية تنسيق الوحيد تعرض لها المسجد الأقصى خلال عام 2014. هناك عدد من الانتهاكات، هناك عدد من الانتهاكات التي تعرض لها المسجد الأقصى تفوق سنوات ماضية، أكثر من 60 انتهاك، وأكثرها اقتحامات للمسجد الأقصى، محاولات اقتحام من أفراد من مسؤولين في كيان العدو الإسرائيلي، ومن مجموعات أيضا من الصهاينة واليهود حاولوا اقتحام هذا المسجد. هناك حفريات تتوسع تحت المسجد الأقصى تهدد بانهياره، وهناك أيضا طروحات إسرائيلية جدية في الكنيسة الإسرائيلي من أجل وضع اليد على المسجد الأقصى وأخذ ولايته التي هي للأردن. وبالتالي أيضا هناك طروحات لإعادة تقسيم المسجد الأقصى ليكون قسم من هذا المسجد لليهود. والعمل يسير في اتجاهين: اتجاه إعلامي موسع من أجل ترويض العقل الإسلامي لتقبل فكرة سقوط المسجد الأقصى وخروج المسجد الأقصى من أيدي المسلمين أو هدمه أو انهياره وما إلى ذلك. وهناك خطط عملية أيضا ومشاريع قوانين يطرحها الصهاينة الآن. هذا هو حال المسجد الأقصى. نحن في مرحلة تاريخية كثير من الاعتداءات التي يتعرض لها المسجد الأقصى يوميا كانت تحصل عليها انتفاضات كبرى ومظاهرات كبرى في العالم الإسلامي سابقا وفي فلسطين، ولكن الآن يتعرض المسجد الأقصى لهذه الانتهاكات دون أن يتحرك ساكن في العالم الإسلامي. إذن نحن أمام مشهد بعيد عن آمالنا وطموحاتنا وأحلامنا. ما هو السبب؟ عندما نراقب لماذا اليوم تتصاعد المحاولات الصهيونية للسيطرة على المسجد الأقصى بهذا الشكل والانتهاكه؟ أنا شخصياً أرى أن المشهد الأساسي الذي يدفع الصهيوني إلى هذا هو ما نعيشه نحن اليوم كمسلمين. نحن نعيش في واقع مر ومؤلم ومأساوي. نعيش وكأن الله عز وجل قد أوصانا وقال لنا: وتنازعوا لتفشلوا. هكذا، وهو الذي أوصانا بصريح كتابه: ولا تنازعوا فتفشلوا وتذهب ريحكم. نحن اليوم في هذه الحالة الكبيرة من الصدام، الاختلاف، التنازع، القتل، حتى أننا مع الأسف بدأنا نشهد في كثير من المناطق في العالم الإسلامي من يروج بشكل المسلمين من قلبه شيء من الرحمة يصورونه، وهو الذي يحرك كل هذه الجرائم في العالم الإسلامي. ولكن لا شك أنه عندما رأى حالة الضعف هذه وحالة التنازع وحالة الفشل التي نعيشها، بات يتحرك بشكل أكثر جدية وأكثر جرأة من أجل السيطرة على المسجد الأقصى. هل نريد فعلا أن نحرر المسجد الأقصى أو أن ندافع عنه أو أن نحفظ على الأقل وضعه الحالي من التردي والتراجع؟ هذه المسؤولية الكبيرة التي يطرحها هذا المؤتمر. أنا أعتقد أننا اليوم في هذا المشهد المؤلم الذي نعيشه والذي باتت تغيب فيه فلسطين خلف الكثير من الأولويات، إلا أنها أي فلسطين بشكل عام والأقصى بالنسبة للمسلمين بشكل خاص هي الكلمة السواء الوحيدة التي لا تزال تجمع عليها الأمة، باختلاف أطيافها، باختلاف مذاهبها، باختلاف تياراتها الفكرية والسياسية. عندما تطرح اليوم في الأمة الإسلامية موضوع فلسطين لا يزال موضوعا إجماعيا رغم كل المحاولات لتحييده إعلاميا، لتحييد موضوع فلسطين إعلاميا. إذا استفدنا فعلا من هذه الكلمة السواء، والجميل جدا في هذا المؤتمر أن كل الكلمات كانت تركز على هذا المنحى. كنا نسمع في السنوات الأخيرة، السنتين أو الثلاث سنوات الأخيرة، في الكثير من المؤتمرات التي تعقد عن القدس وعن فلسطين مع الأسف تتحول إلى نزاع حول القضايا الخلافية الأخرى، لنختلف أينما أردنا في مختلف القضايا، ولكن بما أن عندنا كلمة سواء يمكن أن نجتمع عليها وأرضية مشتركة، فلنجتمع معا على فلسطين، ومن أجل الأقصى علنا نستطيع أن نحفظ ما يمكن حفظه من كرامة هذا المسجد الذي هو من أقدس مقدساتنا على الإطلاق. لا بأس أن أذكر نصا يبين هذا التهديد الخطير. يقول نائبة وزير الأديان الإسرائيلية، تقول: لقد أنهى مكتبي وضع اللوائح القانونية لترتيب صلوات في الأقصى، وبقي فقط على نتنياهو أن يوقع ذلك. إذن هناك خطط مدروسة وجاهزة، وهم يشعرون بهذا الضعف الذي نعيش فيه. اليوم عندما نجتمع في هذا البلد الكبير والكريم ماليزيا، ونجد هذه الوجوه في كل مكان تحركنا فيه، عندما نطرح موضوع فلسطين نجد هذه الوجوه والأفئدة التي تشعر بالحب والحنين لفلسطين وللمسجد الأقصى. يشعرنا هذا بأن في الأمة، في عمق، في قلوب، في أفئدة أبناء هذه الأمة يوجد من الطاقة والحرارة الكثير مما يمكن أن يستفاد منه. كم يؤلمنا ويحزننا ويبكينا أن نجد شباب الأمة يقتلون في معارك داخلية بين المسلمين. هذه الطاقات الكبرى التي تهدر على هذه الأرض وتلك الأرض، ونجد أن الإسرائيلي يعيش في حالة من الراحة والرفاهية، وأن إخواننا الفلسطينيين محاصرون أشد من أي وقت مضى، خصوصا في غزة الحبيبة المحاصرة. إذن الطريق الأول إلى تحرير المسجد الأقصى إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. إذا لم نغير ما بأنفسنا من هذا التنازع، لا يمكن بحال من الأحوال أن نصل إلى تحقيق ما نريده من تحرير المسجد الأقصى، بل كل مناطقنا الأخرى مهددة بالاحتلال، مهددة بالتفرقة، بالتقسيم. وبالتالي ما أطلبه من هذا وأتمناه على هذا المؤتمر الكريم والقائمين عليه أن يعملوا على الاستمرار في هذا المشروع تحت سقف المسجد الأقصى والقدس على هذه الأرضية المشتركة، من أجل أن يقربوا القلوب والأفئدة لتكون جميعا في طريق تحرير المسجد الأقصى. وأسأل الله عز وجل أن يوفقنا لنجتمع مع جميع الحاضرين هنا على أرض المسجد الأقصى بعد أن يكون محررا. دار نقاش بالأمس حول زيارة المسجد الأقصى، هل هي جائزة تحت الاحتلال؟ طبعا لمن هو خارج القدس وخارج فلسطين. أنا أقول هي ليست جائزة بل هي واجبة، يجب علينا أن نذهب إلى المسجد الأقصى، ولكن علينا أن نذهب إلى المسجد الأقصى فاتحين لا تحت حراب وأحذية الصهاينة. اليوم الإسرائيلي هو الذي يسوق ويروج بقوة ويدعو جميع أبناء العالم وعلى رأسهم المسلمين لزيارة المسجد الأقصى، من أجل أن يقول أن هذه البلاد مفتوحة لكم، لماذا تقولون أننا نمنعكم أو أننا نقوم بشيء من العنصرية في هذا الإطار؟ تعالوا وليرى العالم كيف نسمح لكم. وقد أمرنا الله عز وجل ووعدنا بأن ندخل، ولكن كما دخلوه أول مرة فاتحين منتصرين إن شاء الله ندخل جميعا إلى المسجد الأقصى. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
We thank Sheikh Yusuf for his very enlightening speech on the importance of Masjid Al-Aqsa itself and how it is now being forgotten by Muslims, especially whenever there's some kind of aggression or an attack or any violation of the sanctity of the Masjid. The response given by the Muslim world and the Ummah is not as expected. So we will be continuing, since we're still waiting for Dr. Anwar, who is not yet here. Is Professor Professor Muhammad Abu Bakar will be speaking on Palestine post-Cold War. Now, Professor Muhammad Abu Bakar is currently with the University of Malaya. He is a distinguished scholar who has held several positions in many parts of the world as a visiting scholar to many noted universities. He has written many books and, of course, many articles on international affairs, and particularly on Muslims in Palestine and other oppressed parts of the world. Of course, his biodata is quite long, and I do not want to take too much of time reading the whole description of his achievements. I would just like to give him more time to talk on this issue. So without much ado, I would like to call Dr. Paduka Muhammad, Professor Muhammad Abu Bakar, to deliver his speech.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Chairman, honorable panelists and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I've been made to speak on the subject of post-Cold War Palestine. And for the purpose of those who may not be able to follow me in English, we have already distributed the Malay version of it. And hopefully everybody is concerned is already equipped with that. While it is very much in order, while it is very right for us to be preoccupied with the problems on the ground, with the struggle in Palestine itself, with the Arab unity, and so on and so forth. We also have to look at the larger picture, the so-called international security architecture, the global configuration of power of the moment, the so-called New World Order. Without understanding this reality, the larger picture, we may not be able to really mobilize the forces on the ground. We may not be able to understand the problems at hand, the dynamics that have been working either in the Arab world or beyond. And that is very crucial. Earlier on, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of international communism, we have been living in what is now referred to as the period of the Cold War. A period of ideological confrontation between the East and the West, between America and its followers on the one side, and the Soviet Union and its followers on the other. And because of that balance of power, balance of terror situation, many countries, including the Arab world, stood to benefits. The Arab countries of Egypt, of Syria, and Muslim countries of Iran and Turkey, and so on and so forth, were able to have greater strategic value as a result of the ideological conflict between the East and the West. Both sides, the American side and the Soviet side, were all vying for support among third world countries, among the Arab nation. So in the circumstances of that time, when Muslim countries had greater strategic value, they were courted, they were befriended, and in that situation, they were able to have greater leverage when it came to fighting for the Palestinians. They were getting higher arms from both the Soviet Union and the Americans. They were getting moral and material support across the globe, just because they were strategically important to both the West and the East. That is number one. Number two, during the Cold War era, the third world countries also were all championing the cause of the Palestinian because it benefited them. Because they knew that by going together with the Palestinian, they would become popular among the newly liberated people of the third world. So you have had that also. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of international communism, it ushers in a new period called the end of the Cold War, ushered in a period called the New World Order, which has become very much an American international order. The new order, or the post-Cold War period, also is characterized by the lack or the failure of the West to really do something in order to leverage development, in order to champion the have-less and have-nots among the world, in spite of the promises of the peace dividend to those others apart from the West. Now, the Muslim countries, including the Arab nation, no longer have the same strategic value. They are now on the receiving side. The American and the West could, with impunity, bulldoze them, fervorize them, victimize them, all because they no longer command their respect. They no longer have that great strategic value of before. In the circumstances in which the Americans have become the unipower, the sole superpower, they could also turn all these countries into either grounds for the exploitation of their weapons, or recreational centers, or just places which are of no significance in the struggle to dominate the world and to globalize Western values across the globe. So, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and because of the end of international communism, these various countries including the Arab nation, have lost their strategic value, and in the circumstances they are now, they are not able to confront Palestine as they have done before. At least they have gone through the 4 wars: the 1948 war, the 1956 war, 1967 war, and the 1993 war. At that time, they were showered with support. They were given help in the forms of arms by the Soviet Union, and so on and so forth. That is number 1. Number 2, in the circumstances of the post-Cold War era now, the Arab states are in shambles. There are divisions not between nations, but also within nations of the Arab countries themselves. The fragmentation of the Arab world is the end result, as a result of the efforts of the Americans and also of the Israelis. So in the situations the way we are now, we have sectarianism in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq. And those countries which were able to live to the challenge of the American were simply overcome through wars, as in the case of the invasion of Iraq, and so on and so forth, as in the case of the invasion of Libya, and so forth and so forth. So in other words, the second characteristic of the post-Cold War era is the fragmentation of the Arab world. It's the weakening of the Arab world, is sectarianism, which therefore demolish them, demoralize them, and make them unable to rise to the challenge of Israel anymore. What more, many of them have been ganging up with the West, as in the case of Egypt under Al-Sisi now. Number 3, as a result of that, Israel has been empowered. Israel is being empowered. Israel is thinking of greater Israel, covering Judea and Samaria, the land of the Canaan, between the Euphrates and the Oxus, and so on and so forth. So in other words, using the old templates of the Zionists, Israel now is in a better position to overcome the Arabs, the fragmented Arabs, the wicked Arabs in any war. So the Israelis do not need anymore the 5th Arab-Israel war. They don't have to go to another war anymore because they have won. They have been victorious as a result of the weakening of the Arab world. Worse still, when some of the Arab armies, as in the case of Egypt, as mentioned by Brother Muhyiddin, have been killing their own people. The Arab armies of Egypt have killed more Arabs than the number of Arabs killed by the Jews during some of the periods. Creating this solution, greater positions among certain other countries apart from the West, including Russia, China, and so on. We have to make sure that the whole strategic value. We have to support them, not because we love them, but because we want them to be a challenge to the American, to the West. We have to do it by some form of legislation. We have to think of the larger picture. Second, globalized international, the way we have done in the case of the Gaza flood, the position of the population of Gaza, when many people, many peace groups, NGOs across the globe converging on Gaza in order to alleviate suffering to overcome the base, so that the predicament has befallen the Gazans base. That is another way we have to organize. We should allow the Israeli lobby to mastermind everything, to control everything in the United States, thereby equating the Palestinian struggle to that of a terrorism, and so on and so forth. So far, they have been able to achieve that. So much that younger generations of Muslims are equally taken by it. So much that they are no longer supportive of the Palestinian cause. So at the international level also, we need to imbue this generation by this consciousness of the need not only to be united, but also of the history of the Palestinian struggle, as alluded earlier by Brother Muhyiddin, and so on and so forth. And number three, like it or not, is the Palestinians, who at the end of the day must be the crux, who should constitute the core in the struggle itself. We have to have that morally and materially. So, in other words, if at all we are able to band together these three forces at work, A, at the international global level, by reconfiguring the international order, two, by marshalling the international forces, the NGOs and so on, so that the picture about Palestine is being painted in a positive light. And number three, if we are able to continue supporting the Palestinian in their own right, in their own land, inshallah, with the convergence of these factors, we should be able to persist in our struggle. Of course, right now, after 66 years of Israeli rule in Palestine, we have not been able to rise to the challenge. But that in no way means that we should be at a loss as a result of that. After all, the Jews have been waiting for it, for this real moment to create the promised land, the so-called promised land, for the so-called chosen people for the last 2,000 years. Having been banished to Iraq, to Ethiopia, having been banished by the Spaniards during the Inquisition, having been killed by the Nazis of Germany, they are able to come up in force and finally are able to overcome the obstacles and finally ending up in. So inshallah, we should not be dampened by these forces at work which have tarnished, which have demolished, which have crushed the struggle of the anti-Israeli groups. We should resurrect from all this shamble. We should be able to create a new consciousness among the new generation so that the struggle for the Palestinian state, for Baitul Maqdis, will continue. Inshallah. Wa billahi tawfiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor. Although each speaker has been given 15 minutes, I found that my job has been made very much easier. I did not have to remind them of the time that they have to stop. So this is a very good development, especially in a conference like this. Do we have any indication at the moment? Yes, Dr. Firdaus.
Thank you, Brother Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to now welcome our dearest brother, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, to be with here today to deliver his keynote address. On behalf of the organizing committee, we are very sorry to interrupt our panelists in our second session today to give some ways to our brother to deliver his keynote address. Ladies and gentlemen, Afwan, very sorry, there are slightly changes of the program. We will proceed with our other panelists with the discussion on this session too, because our brother Anwar will be here by 10:55, inshallah. Okay, thank you, brother moderator. Please proceed.
Thank you very much for the information. But this is something that because everyone is waiting is present. So let's finish up the last with the last speaker, because I think it's not going to be too long. And since now it's already 10:30, I would like to call upon Professor Dr. Hafizi Muhammad Noor. He's the General Coordinator of Aqsa Sharif Organization, one of the most active organizations in Malaysia, involved in helping, assisting the oppressed people of Palestine. So he's going to talk on the strategic role of non-Muslims to liberate Al-Quds. Hafizi.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Salatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man da'a bi da'watihi ila yaumiddin. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you, moderator, our distinguished panelists and guests in this auspicious conference. It's a little of an anticlimax because everybody is waiting for Dr. Sri Anwar to appear on stage and deliver his keynote speech. So I won't be taking too much time. And since I think most of the audience are Malay speaking and it's translated into Arabic, why don't I deliver my speech in Bahasa? Is that okay? Okay. Alhamdulillah, terima kasih banyak kepada pihak pengajuk yang sudi untuk menjemput dan memberi saya peluang untuk berkongsi beberapa pandangan tentang isu Palestin. Alhamdulillah saya telah pun mengirim kertas kerja, tapi mungkin agak lewat jadi tidak sempat untuk dicetak. Mungkin pengajar boleh mengusahakan supaya kertas kerja tersebut dicetak dan diedarkan sebelum konferensi berakhir. Saya nak sebut sedikit tentang apa yang disampaikan dalam kertas kerja tersebut dan juga perkara-perkara yang berkaitan. Isunya adalah berkaitan dengan inisiatif terkini untuk proses damai yang melibatkan pihak berkuasa Palestin dan Israel, iaitu satu inisiatif yang diusahakan oleh Secretary of State John Kerry yang dinamakan Framework of Peace. So kertas kerja tersebut berjudul Framework of Peace, The Last Nail in the Coffin. Kenapa saya disebut inisiatif perdamaian yang terkini ini sebagai the last nail in the coffin? Sebab tidak kurang daripada 13 perjanjian damai telah pun ditandatangani sejak tahun 1993, itu bermula dengan Oslo Accord. It's a landmark peace deal, the peace agreement that has led to the Palestinian Authority back then, PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, untuk mengiktiraf Israel for the very first time 1993. Dan sebagai imbalannya, Israel telah mengangkat PLO sebagai PA, pihak berkuasa Palestin yang dipimpin oleh Mahmud Abbas sehingga hari ini. Baik, selepas 13 perjanjian damai yang kesemuanya merupakan satu penipuan. Maka inisiatif yang terbaru yang dinamakan sebagai Framework of Peace bukanlah suatu yang baru, tapi sebenarnya suatu proses ataupun perjanjian damai yang kita semula is a recycle process. Tapi ianya merupakan a desperate attempt, suatu cubaan yang terdesak untuk mencapai satu persetujuan di mana Palestin akan concede ataupun menyerahkan segala-galanya kepada pihak Israel, yang mana dengannya akan wujudlah Sabah negara Palestin tanpa kedaulatan, Sabah negara Palestin tanpa ketenteraan, Sabah negara Palestin tanpa sempadan, Sabah negara Palestin tanpa ibu negara. So itulah hasrat dan agenda mereka dalam konteks the two-state solution yang sudah pasti akan gagal. Mereka hendak mewujudkan Sabah negara Palestin yang sebenarnya tidak membawa sebarang makna kepada kewujudan Palestin itu sendiri. Dan saya nak sebut secara ringkas dekat sini 7 tuntutan yang dikemukakan oleh John Kerry, iaitu antaranya the key ones yang kunci ataupun yang paling penting ialah yang mana Amerika akan memantau negara Palestin yang bakal wujud tersebut dengan aset-aset ketenteraan, termasuklah dengan menggunakan pesawat tanpa juru terbang ataupun drone yang sama-sama kita maklumi. Itu salah satu syarat yang dikemukakan. Yang kedua ialah the so-called Framework of Peace ini juga tidak akan mengiktiraf Gaza, kerana sebagaimana kita tahu Gaza adalah sebahagian daripada duri dalam daging yang pasti akan menggagalkan perjanjian damai yang diusahakan oleh Amerika bersama Israel.
Excuse me, our speaker. I have to interrupt you for a while, but you may continue after this. Okay, we just would like to welcome our brother Anwar to be with us, and he will sit here for a while to listen to you as well. And after that, we'll continue with his keynote address. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy today to have our distinguished keynote speaker, our brother Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim, to be with us for this auspicious international conference discussing on liberating Al-Aqsa and defending the rights of the oppressed Ummah. Ahlan wa sahlan, ya akhi karim. Our panel may proceed now. Thank you.
Selamat datang Datuk Sri. Baik, untuk menyambung perbicaraan tentang topik yang saya bicarakan sebentar tadi, itu berkaitan dengan inisiatif perdamaian yang terkini, Framework of Peace. Salah satu daripada syarat yang sangat tidak munasabah yang diletakkan oleh Israel dan juga John Kerry, Secretary of State USA, ialah mereka mendesak Palestine Authority, pihak berkuasa Palestin, untuk mengiktiraf negara Israel sebagai negara Yahudi, to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Seolah-olah pengiktirafan pihak berkuasa Palestin ataupun sebelumnya PLO pada tahun 1993 dalam perjanjian Oslo yang bersedia untuk mengiktiraf Israel tidak memadai. Mengiktiraf Israel tidak memadai, mereka sekarang ini mendesak supaya pihak berkuasa Palestin mengiktiraf Israel sebagai sebuah negara Yahudi. Yang mana ini mempunyai beberapa implikasi. Implikasi yang pertama ialah rakyat Arab di dalam negara Palestin yang terjajah, whatever you want to call it, occupied of Palestine or illegitimate state of Israel, akan menjadi rakyat kelas kedua, second class citizen, yang akan dipikirkan, will be marginalized. Dan yang keduanya, dengan mengisytihar Israel sebagai negara Yahudi, by declaring Israel as a Jewish state, maka dengan itu secara otomatik pelarian Palestin yang berada di seluruh dunia, di Lebanon, di Syria, di Jordan dan di tempat lain tidak lagi dibenarkan untuk pulang ke negara ataupun tanah air mereka. Yang mana hak untuk pulang ke negara Palestin telah dijamin oleh PBB pada tahun 1949 dalam resolusi 194-3. Jadi inilah makar ataupun kejahatan Israel terhadap rakyat Palestin, yang mana mereka berusaha untuk menafikan hak rakyat Palestin untuk kembali ke negara mereka dan hak mereka untuk mempunyai sebuah negara dan tanah air yang boleh mereka sebut sebagai negara mereka sendiri. Kenapa mereka begitu desperate? Kenapa mereka begitu terdesak? Kita kena memahami situasi geopolitik, perubahan-perubahan yang berlaku di negara-negara Arab, di Mesir, di Syria, di Jordan, yang disebut secara popularnya sebagai Arab Spring, meletakkan Israel dalam keadaan yang sangat terdesak. Kerana itu mereka terpaksa mengambil langkah-langkah yang drastik bagi menghalang proses kebangkitan umat Arab. Yang itu membawa saya kepada sejarah yang saya akan sebut selepas ini secara ringkas. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dirahmati Allah sekalian, bila kita mengenal tahun ini 2014, ia adalah merupakan bulan tahun yang ke-100 pecahnya Perang Dunia Pertama. Nah, Perang Dunia Pertama ini mempunyai makna yang sangat besar bagi umat Islam, walaupun tidak dinyatakan sedemikian di dalam naratif rasmi. It's not being stated in the official narrative. The First World War is the European War. Tetapi sebenarnya Perang Dunia Pertama adalah satu peperangan yang melibatkan Khilafah Uthmaniyah Turki. Dan kenapa Turki terlibat? For apparent reason. Ini yang disebut secara resmi di dalam buku sejarah, kerana Turki adalah sekutu Jerman. Is an ally of Germany in the Central Powers ataupun kuasa-kuasa tengah. Tetapi sebab utama kenapa Turki diheret di dalam Perang Dunia Pertama ini ialah kerana mereka mengambil ini sebagai satu kesempatan untuk mengeluarkan Turki daripada persamaan ataupun formula keseimbangan kuasa-kuasa besar di Eropah, dan sekaligus merampas tanah-tanah umat Islam yang memberikan wala dan kesetiaannya kepada khilafah Uthmaniyah. Sebab itu tuan-tuan, kalau kita perhatikan, apabila Britain, France and Russia, when these three great powers of Europe, Britain, France and Russia, declared war on Turkey in November 1914, maka Khilafah Uthmaniyah melalui pejabat Qadi besarnya Khairi Effendi mengisytiharkan jihad akbar fardu ain. Jadi Khilafah Uthmaniyah declare jihad akbar fardu ain, that propagating jihad is an obligation for all Muslims all over the world, and evidence has cropped up that one of the struggle in this country, Tuk Janggut in Kelantan, was not so much against the tax imposed on the Kelantanese people, but it's actually a response to the call of Khilafah Uthmaniyah, Jihad Akbar Fardu Ain, in order to face the British colonial rule, especially in Kelantan. This we have to look back and reassess our history, and then we will realize that kita akan menyedari bahawa kita mempunyai pertautan yang sangat erat dengan rakyat Palestin apabila kita bercakap tentang perjuangan pembebasan Palestin. Bahkan in the same year, in 1915, pada tahun yang sama, pada tahun 1915, kebangkitan untuk janggut ini sebenarnya adalah menyusuli satu lagi kebangkitan di Singapura yang disebut sebagai Dahagi, yang di mana tentera-tentera India yang beragama Islam telah bangkit menentang tentera British kerana mereka nak dihantar ke Timur Tengah, mereka nak dihantar ke Gaza, mereka nak dihantar ke Sinai, mereka nak dihantar ke Iraq, ya, bersama-sama dengan pasukan British bagi menghadapi khilafah Uthmaniyah. Mereka enggan, jadi mereka bangkit dan memberontak, dan pemberontakan ini disebut dia Dahagi, yang mana pada peringkat awalnya mereka menang, tapi kemudian mereka dikhianati oleh Johor yang menghantar pasukan tentera bantuan timbalan senti negeri bagi membantu British to put down the rebellion untuk membateras pemberontakan tersebut. Inilah aspek-aspek daripada sejarah kita yang perlu kita lihat balik, ya, supaya kita melihat isu ini secara holistik, melihat isu pertautan antara dunia Islam di sebelah Nusantara, ada juga bumi Palestin. Dan inilah kaitan yang sangat erat antara kita dan bumi Palestin. Akhir sekali, sebagai poin yang terakhir, sebelum kita memberi ruang kepada Datuk Seri Anwar untuk memberikan ucapan pertama beliau, sebenarnya sejarah perjuangan umat Islam di Nusantara ini berkaitan dengan Palestin adalah lebih jauh lagi, iaitu pada kurun yang ke-16. Sebagaimana kita tahu, Portugis menguasai Melaka pada tahun 1511, dan dalam ucapan-ucapan Alfonso di Albuquerque, kalau kita membaca komentarius, satu catatan beliau terhadap peperangan ini, di mana beliau seringkali menggesa askar-askar Portugis untuk meneruskan perjuangan, dan dua tempat disebut, iaitu Kahirah dan Makkah. Sekiranya kita dapat kuasai Melaka, maka kita akan menguasai Kahirah dan Makkah. Kenapa Makkah? Makkah adalah pusat kerohanian Islam. Kenapa Kahirah? Kahirah adalah pusat ekonomi, the economic hub of the ummah in the 15th and the 16th century. Dan sebenarnya objektif mereka bukan Makkah, bukan Kahirah. Itu adalah batu loncatan untuk menuju matlamat sebenar mereka adalah Baitul Maqdis. Dan ini adalah merupakan agenda besar yang dibawa oleh Alfonso de Albuquerque atas arahan daripada King Portugis, King Manuel of Portugis, King of Spain, King of France, and King of England. Dia membawa satu agenda yang cukup besar, iaitu untuk mendapatkan semula Baitul Maqdis yang telah dikuasai ataupun dirampas, diambil semula oleh Salahuddin Al-Ayyubi pada tahun 1187. Jadi hadirin, saya tidak mau memanjangkan lagi ucapan, tetapi sebagai satu perbandingan, Baitul Maqdis dikuasai oleh tentera-tentera salib pada tahun 1090 dan kemudian diambil semula oleh umat Islam pada tahun 1187, berarti hampir 100 tahun. Ya, Baitul Maqdis dikuasai oleh musuh. Dan kalau kita mengambil tarikh 1948 sebagai berdirinya negara Arab Israel, berarti tempoh hayat Israel tidak lama lagi, dan petanda-petanda ke arah kejayaan umat Islam adalah amat jelas. Dan apa yang berlaku dari sudut geopolitiknya, Arab Spring dan sebagainya, adalah petanda-petanda perkembangan di Turki, perkembangan di Mesir, perkembangan di Syria. Semua ini adalah isyarat-isyarat jelas bahawa kita semua akan menuju kepada kemenangan dan pembebasan Baitul Maqdis. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Hafizi, and we have come to the end of the session. I would like to hand the session to Dr. Firdaus.
Thank you, Brother Moderator. Jazakumullah khairan to all of our panels today. Alhamdulillah, we have come to the end of our second session for the second day of our international conference. We would like to call Ustaz Abdul Ghani to present some memento to our panelists and also to our moderator. Tafadhal, mashkura ya Ustaz. Our first speaker, Professor Dr. Maman Abdul Rahman, Head of Persatuan Umat Islam Indonesia, Persis. Our second panel, Sheikh Yusuf Abbas, the General Coordinator of the Global Campaign to Return to Palestine. Our third panel, Tuan Haji Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir, the Director of Citizens International CI. And our Professor, Datuk Paduka Professor Muhammad Abu Bakar from Department of International Strategic Studies, University of Malaya. And our last speaker for this session, Professor Dr. Hafizi Muhammad Sharif Organization of Malaysia. Last but not least, our dearest moderator, Dr. Abdul Latif bin Muhammad Ibrahim, UTM Perdana School STI Policy. Some photo session, please. Thank you to all our panelists and our moderator. Solidarity. Jazakumullah khair. Alhamdulillah, before we proceed to our distinguished keynote speaker, we will show a montage of our conference for a few minutes before we proceed to the next agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.